Going to do is talk a little bit about successes and expectations. So we'll kind of review. We did a series like this back in the summer. And again, that was before anyone dove into the school year. And so we want to talk a little bit about what you've done so far and expectations that you have for these upcoming sessions. We'll talk a little bit about what does engagement really mean? It's a term that gets thrown around quite a bit in education, like, oh, our kids are engaged. We need more engagement. When we really struggle with defining engagement. And then we'll talk about what are some things to do to develop communication and connections with your students before the semester starts, over the first few days, and how to build on that throughout the rest of the semester. So that is our agenda for the next hour, and we are going to move forward. So on that note, we'll always start with a quote, but realize that a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, not only today, but over the next couple of weeks, are going to be things that you probably should already be doing. And for those of you who are teaching both in a face-to-face environment, as well as your virtual academy hours or whatever sections you have of that, really the notion should be the same. The techniques should be the same, or the strategies should be the same. They might just be implemented in slightly different ways, just based on the opportunities and the challenges that you have with a remote environment. And sometimes those present challenges, but sometimes they also present opportunities. So always try to keep an open mind for this, because online learning works differently, but it can work if done well. And so we're going to start off. I know there's only a few of us here, but let's give yourself a hand. It is the end of the semester. Woohoo! You've made it through one semester and then some. You had a trial run from March through June, and now you've made it through one full semester of remote learning. So let's celebrate a little bit. And we'll just take a couple minutes for the teachers in the room, or actually anybody here. I'll include Judy and myself in this as well. Let's talk about some successes you've had. So it's a small group, so let's just unmute and say, what is one thing that went really well this past semester? And if you can also just type it in the chat bar as well.
Well, I can start. I ran across the hall to one of my colleagues this morning, and I was looking for beginning of the year stuff last night. So this morning I went in and I was like, have you gone back to look at where we started? Like, everything is different. Like, so how we interact with the kids, the way that we set up our classes, like we've come so far in 3 or 4 months. So, and that was dramatically different than what we were doing in March. So I don't know. Everything's different. Most of it's better. I think the kids have learned a lot. We've certainly learned a lot. Every day I still learn something new, or something completely, like not having the video on. Apparently I had it on in another app. And so like little things like that, and big things, I feel like we still do learn every single day is something good.
Awesome. Anyone else?
I think things that went really well was me just chilling out a lot in general and not making a big deal out of small mistakes. And I do think that I never thought I was technologically like proficient, but I feel like I've come a really long way in just this past 6 months. And I feel like I learned so much about what not to do next semester. Like, I'm ready to rock and roll and do things differently because of all the things I've learned just in 4 months. I wouldn't say things went amazingly well for all of my students, but I think for most of them, since I have many advanced classes, it was a breeze. But then I had 2 regular chem classes that were just tough to try to keep engaged, which is why I'm here. So thank you for your time.
Alex, I taught chemistry for 13 years, so I can see where these types of things start to, where the things we talk about today, it's like, oh yeah, I could do that. Or just the content doesn't lend itself well to some of the strategies you do. No, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
All right. So now what we'd want to do is really just kind of sit there and say, what do you want to get out of these next few weeks? And so Judy put a link to the Jamboard in the chat bar, and I'd like you to click on it. But we're kind of thinking that most teachers are going to fall into one of these 4 categories as you look on the screen here. So if you click on the link that Judy put in the chat, what we'd like you to do is just kind of, and again, there's only a few of you here, so maybe you just kind of talk about which one you feel like. But which one of these 4 categories do you fall into? And be honest. You had a pretty good semester. The students seemed engaged, even though the cameras aren't on, but I'm looking to get some new strategies. Or, you're Mrs. Krabappel from The Simpsons, and you're just kind of, really nervous. It's been a rough semester. Things are not going well at all, and you're just kind of treading water. The third person's kind of the all steak, no sizzle. I'm sorry, all sizzle, no steak. Lots of tools, lots of everything, seeing results, but it's kind of hitting the wall. You can't keep the party going forever, and you're looking for a little more meat to what you do. Or you're Ben Stein in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where you're just doing the bare minimum. Basically just doing worksheets on Google Classroom and having them turn it in, and everyone's kind of doing just the minimum to get by. And so what we were going to ask everybody to do is just kind of hover over one of these people and kind of drag them over to where you feel you are at after one semester. So, or we can just kind of vocalize since it is a small group.
Is this one of the backdrops for Jamboard? Because this is kind of...
No, what we did is we actually created this. Just if we want to talk technique here, we just inserted a couple boxes and then imported a few pictures and then put a few text boxes in. So I'll kind of hide the mirror here and I can move this around. That's just a regular old text box. This is just an image I imported. This is just a GIF I imported. Again, these are just, wait, hold on. These are, sorry, I'm ruining this for you, Judy. You did a really good job at these early. The boxes, did you put those in, Judy, after?
Created.
Okay, so you did the image thing. Okay. So another thing you can do is if we just kind of do this, you can create a box, a colored box, and then just move it around or change the color if you need to. So that was our draft. Judy is a much more aesthetically aware or astute person than I am. So I kind of frame the house and she does all the stuff to make it look like it's not thrown together at the last second, because that's what I look like I do. So
the icons on the bottom, that's part of the Jamboard?
Yeah, we just made one and copy pasted 30 times.
Oh, okay.
And so you just grab one and drag it or twist it or make it bigger if you wanted to.
Got it.
Whoa. So, and the other thing I'll point out is, these are things there where we are trying to model some things that you can do with your students. So think about how you might use this as you start the semester. And I'll Alex, I was kind of, when I started this idea, I was like, well, what kind of chem student would, if I were teaching chemistry, how would I frame this? I would say, well, I'm good at math, but I sometimes have the problem of applying it in different areas. Or, I get it when the teacher does it on the board, but I feel lost when I do it after. All those typical things you might see. And you would, if you did this anonymously, then the students would kind of, drag and drop as they saw fit. And you would get an idea of what your classroom makeup was like. So sometimes anonymity, when you're doing these formative feedback exercises, is very useful. And so on that note, let's talk a little bit about engagement. And as I mentioned earlier, you can't see engagement if you can't define it. And there's a link in that slide deck. And it's a really interesting article to read. It's a few years old, but one of these things that we always talk about with engagement is, oh, my kids are engaged. And you really have to question that sentence. Are they engaged if everyone's laughing and having fun? Are they, if they're busy working and they're quiet, are they engaged? So we can't really see it unless we have some sort of definition to imply what engagement is. And engagement really has 3 elements. It has an element of attention, it has an element of commitment, and it has an element of persistence. So are they paying attention? Are they committed to doing what you're asking them to be doing? And will they persist when it gets hard? And that's where you start to see this wavering of what engagement actually is. If they're paying attention, but it's, when everything's fun, and again, using the science teacher analogy, if I'm blowing stuff up, everyone's like, yeah. But then I say, okay, let's calculate the amount of energy that it took to do this. And they all go, nah. They're not engaged. So, we see that a lot. And so really having a good sound definition of engagement is really helpful when we talk about how to combat it or build engagement strategies into your teaching. Another thing about engagement is that there's 3 different levels of engagement, and we call them cognitive engagement, behavioral engagement, and affective engagement. And they're somewhat similar to those other things I talked about earlier, but this is from the Academic Community of Engagement Framework from Borup and others. Really in an online setting, and this framework is geared toward online is, do we have strong independent engagement? Do we have a course community support, meaning there's structures built into a course that we design in Google Classroom or whatever LMS you happen to be using? And is there this personal community support? What are the people doing? What are the teachers doing? What are the facilitators doing? What are the students doing for each other to build that community of engagement? And so this lists some things here that you can consider as, what am I doing? And so when we look at some examples of supports in each of those domains, look at how many of these deal with communication, which is the topic we're covering today. Now, some of these are going to be kind of, fairly, I'll say, like, not necessarily important, but not necessarily to really what we're talking about, like that first bullet point about schools providing family Chromebook access. Yeah, if you don't have internet access and you don't have a technology access, you can't be engaged in an online course. But then if you look at some of these other ones, teachers monitored student activity and emailed or called. That's important. To check on students when activity was low. Counselors got involved when access was an issue. And also, they need support with access or navigation in the course. So when they first start in the course, what did the administrators do? Were they encouraging and supportive of their teachers to try and fail forward? Were teachers able to provide good feedback and have virtual office hours? Were teachers and administrators doing some more motivational things? As much as we sometimes poo-poo motivation as being, well, it can't be all bells and whistles. There is an importance tied to that in that affective domain of engagement. So when we really look at, are they engaged? You're literally looking at it at these three levels. Are they, what types of behaviors are they exhibiting? What type of mental, cognitive functions are they exhibiting? And what type of support are we providing to students and teachers, quite honestly, in the affective domain? And so when you look across that, you're really looking across this whole distance learning spectrum. When we have our synchronous time, when you were meeting with them live over the internet, like we're doing now, what types of things could you do to increase engagement there? Asynchronously, what are you doing, when they're offline, when they're doing homework, or when you're not on a Zoom or a Google Meet? What are we doing to build engagement there? And then in this hybrid kind of environment where you're, mixing some live, some blended, you might be teaching to in some districts, we've got people teaching to a computer and a classroom simultaneously. And so how do we build engagement across those various fields? And so those are the things we're going to talk about over the next hour and moving forward. But some of the primary things that really tie into communication and connection with our students across the board can be summarized in an active online presence. And raise your hand if you've taken an online college course for, let's say, your master's or specialists. Okay, you may have had a teacher who was, chatting, participating in the discussions, providing good feedback, or you may have had the teacher who basically posted things on Monday, you submitted things on Sunday, they graded it, turned it back to you with no feedback, didn't even tell you it was graded, didn't email you, and you really only talked to them or conversed with them when there was either A, a major problem, or B, at the end of the semester when your final project was due. And again, having that experience, you've probably had some good online courses and some bad online courses. And probably the good ones are the ones where the instructor was actively involved. And so what do those types of things look like? Well, when we're talking about communication, we're really looking at something along the lines of having clear and consistent communication. Concise would probably be in there as well. More often than not, those good communicators are proactive, not reactive. They get ahead of things. Being a teacher for multiple years, when problems occur in a face-to-face environment, those same problems will likely occur in a remote environment. So get ahead of them and kind of prep students for that through communication. Being authentic, being ourselves. Sometimes we saw some things early in the spring where these teachers were just going crazy, like wearing hats and outfits every day. And you'd have some teachers who are like, what, that's not me. And that's okay. Along those same lines, being flexible. Being consistent and being flexible sound counterintuitive, but they actually ring true. You're consistent, but then you openly admit or make vocal when flexibility is needed. Like, hey, this didn't go so well, let's change something. Or, you know, I was thinking this is my normal routine, but I think this week we're going to do something different. And then just having a little bit of creative and innovative flair to it, realizing that we're all in this together. We're going to have to try some different things because this is not the exact same environment that we are used to. And so some of the things, and I guess for the rest of like what I'm going to talk about, are some things to do to build those channels of communication before school begins. And again, when we offered this this series of webinars in the summer, this was at the beginning of the school year. These same things apply at the change of semester because you do have that feeling of a clean slate. You are going to have different students. There are going to be shifts in how things are done. And so as you prepare these things for the beginning of the new semester, these are some of the things that you might want to put in if you have a syllabus or a generic statement of expectations that you hand out the first week. And so, content to include, if you don't do this already in your regular syllabus or whatever you hand out at the beginning of the year to students, is have those information pieces there in place. Like, this is how you contact me. These are the means by which you can contact me. And these are the expectations or norms. One of the things that became pretty evident early on is students sometimes don't know how to write an email to a teacher, or even parents sometimes don't know how to write an email to a teacher, to where we're focusing on the best outcomes for our students as possible. They become combative, or they're using language that may not be appropriate, those types of things. So have some sort of statement of expectations in there for norms for teachers, for students, for parents, if you don't already. Again, in terms of means, when can you email me? When can you phone? When would be a good time to video conference? Again, you might have some district requirements or boundaries on that as well. What is your availability? When are you accepting phone calls, or when are you accepting emails? What about turnaround time? If a student emails me and wants something, at 10 o'clock at night and expects this to be resolved by the time they log into Zoom the next morning, that's a bit unrealistic. And so, establish some boundaries in these statements of expectations about turnaround time, and put that on the student as well. So if you email a student, you expect a 24-hour turnaround time, just as they would expect a 24-hour turnaround time for you. On the weekends, maybe have some differences there. I'm not going to check my email over the weekend unless otherwise stated, or if something very important is due on Monday. So build those statements in and be very clear to your students, and that helps open up the lines of communication and sets boundaries on what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. Just a couple generic statements here. I'm not going to read through them. But a couple things that you might want to consider. Again, depending on your situation, depending on the class you teach, depending on the age of the students, depending on all these different things, you'd want to tweak this and any policies you have in the district. But these are just some generic boilerplate statements for what you could do when you're talking about communicating with the instructor, or guidelines for parents when contacting the teacher. Now, you're using Google Classroom. And Google Classroom is very limited in terms of what you can do to stylize the classroom. That's good and bad. But try what you can do to make it a little more personal. So the examples I have there, the first one is just one of your blanket templates from Google Classroom. It's a violin, it's probably a music teacher. But where appropriate, it might be nice to put in a picture of your family and make it a little more hospitable, or change it throughout the year. Hey, it's February, it's Black History Month, President's Day, Valentine's Day, change the theme as you see fit. Another thing that you should consider doing, now that we have a clean slate and you make some changes for the beginning of the semester, is create a navigation tutorial. Create a short video and post it to YouTube, and share that link with students and parents on how to navigate my classroom. And where to go for help, and this is what you're going to find in the stream. This is what you're going to find in the classwork. This is what you're going to find in the people section. Here's the link for the meet. Just walk them through everything and make it amenable to both students and parents for their convenience and their comfort level with operating in an online environment. And the last thing, and this is geared more toward the administrators, but this is something that the teachers should take back to their department heads and administration, is try to create consistency between classes, either between classes in certain grade levels or content areas in a high school setting, or within buildings at an elementary level with standardized templates. So make sure that maybe everyone goes by week or by unit. So the students are logging in, they're not trying to navigate, my first hour is set up way different than my second hour, which is way different than my third hour. Have some things at the beginning, at the top of every classwork panel that here's the syllabus, here's how to tour, here's some tutorials on how to turn in work, et cetera, and make those, maybe one person could create those and share them with the entire building so that everyone has the same instructions. One of the things that we've heard from a lot of districts and a lot of young virtual learners is this cognitive load issue where students are just, it's not the content, it's not even the logging in, it's just having to shift gears and switch mindsets between every hour that they're in. So my first hour is set up one way, and now I have to rethink about, well, no, Mr. Psycho wants it this way, but Miss Bowling wants it this way. That creates barriers to learning. And so whatever you can do to create consistency in your online environment will go a long way to helping your virtual learners. And so in those first few days, and so a lot of those things, I know your new semester starts on the 1st. So those are things that should be taken care of before the 1st. Those first few days, what do we do? And again, using that idea that, in September and January, February, you do kind of have this clean slate. It's a new year, it's a new semester. The grades, you're all starting with a 0 or 100, however you want to phrase that, even though those are probably false dichotomies. But, let's start at the beginning and try to build those connections earlier on. And this is one of the huge things that we find with learning in general, but particularly with online learning. And what's important for both online and face-to-face learning, sometimes that gets upped a little bit for online learning. One of those things is this having students feel a sense of belonging. One of the number one problems we have with online learning pre-pandemic in general is isolation leads to problems. And so if students feel isolated, if students don't feel connected to their teacher, if they do not feel connected to their classmates, as soon as they run into problems, they shut down. And a lot of times that leads to problems both with performance and other things. And so really those first few days, if not first few weeks of the semesters, really focus on that emotional aspect and that and building those, making sure that everyone's cognitive and affective needs are met earlier on to ensure that when you actually get to the content, you don't have to necessarily worry about those barriers as much. But this is a continual thing. This is not one set it and forget it. Like, oh, we did some feel-good activities in first week of February, everyone's good. But it really sets the stage because you're going to need to return to these often throughout the semester. And that's basically how you want to summarize this whole piece of these first few weeks and this building this communication and connecting with your students, is that the relationships are key. And they're always key, but you really have to be more intentional in an online environment than you have to be in a traditional classroom, because you're not seeing them. You're not seeing the look on their face. You're not walking by and noticing their demeanor or their countenance. Those are much more difficult nonverbal cues to pick up in an online environment. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Judy, and she's going to take you through some activities.
Okay, so first thing is, we know you need to get energized, and so do your kids. So this is just, we're going to kind of walk through some different things that you might be able to do with your students that would get them energized, because we know the key here is to get them engaged. We know that kids have phones, and we're going to just create a little energizer here that would give them a productive use of using their phones. So these are quick, so this might be just an idea that is something you could embed into your instruction, whether you be virtual or in person. So it's pretty tight. So you're basically going to get 2 minutes, and we're going to have you guys do this. We're going to give you exactly 2 minutes to use your phone, to use a tablet, to use something, and take an anti-gravity photo. So this is just one example, but it's just an energizer to get kids up, to get moving, to use their phone, and just to promote brainstorming and to activate their brain a little bit. So what I'm going to do in a moment is set the timer for 2 minutes, and where you're going to, so you can either just use your phone to take the picture and upload it, or if you go directly to Padlet, I know some of you are familiar with that. So that link, and Jason will put that in the chat. One of the upgrades with Padlet is that if you just double click anywhere on there, you can of course type something. But if you click on those 3 little dots to the right, it actually has a built-in camera. You'll have to, if it's the first time you've done it, you'll have to click on the allow your camera to be utilized by Padlet, but you can take the picture directly in Padlet itself. So you can snap a photo if you want, or if you want to take a little video. But your challenge is to take 2 minutes, take a stretch, take an anti-gravity photo, and upload it to that Padlet. Any questions? All right, here's your 2-minute energizer. I'm going to set the time, and when 2 minutes is up, we're going to go right on to the next thing. So it is quick. So you think creatively, you can step away from the camera, take your phone, go in the hallway. What might an anti-gravity photo look like? And there's no right answers. This is just a creative use of your technology. Ten seconds.
Oh,
Okay, time is up. So if I were doing this with kids, we would just jump right into the very next thing. And as that's awesome. And with you know, is something kind of built into your routine, but this is just a fun ways just to put in a 2-minute, very structured but fun, creative way, again, to get them to use the tools that they already have, but to just stretch their creativity. So that's just one thing that you might be able to take back to your classroom. And so like Jason said, what we're going to do is just going to go through just some ideas, but I do want to mention that at the very end of this, we're going to share a website that essentially looks like that, but it will have links to all of these resources and then some. So any idea that we're sharing, we'll have a section on there that has some links to some samples that you can use as is or make copies and make them your own. So just going through many of these, as Jason said, we know that relationships are key, and creating a sense of community is huge, both in person and in the virtual world. And we all know we're living it, the isolation we've all felt with COVID. And then you put us into these remote working and remote learning environments, that isolation and feeling disconnected is even greater. So now more than ever, having to do things that connect our kids and connect each other so that they're not just engaging with the computer, but they're engaging with other people. And we know that a big part of that, of course, is building routines, making and building relationships from day one, and then nurturing those as we go along. And so knowing that you guys have gone between in-person and virtual, and you're back in person, but you still have that virtual strand, just thinking of things that you've always done and what might that look differently. So you've always had that morning maybe message that you've put on your whiteboard as kids walk into your class physically. What does that look like when they walk into your virtual classroom? You know, Jason alluded to having a video. Anytime you can put your face or your voice in front of kids, especially for those kids who are not with you in person, is really huge. You know, having posting a different question every day just to ignite some type of a conversation, maybe establishing themes like Math Mondays, Tell Me About It Tuesdays, Would You Rather Wednesdays, Wonder Wednesdays, just some type of theme, creating, Jason knows, like, I love Bitmojis. They just make me smile. And even though it's a cartoon character of yourself, it is just something, again, just to keep putting that human element in front of kids. And then again, igniting conversations where you can. And again, we've got links to a lot of samples in there. Greeting at the door. I know, pre-COVID, a lot of you, outside the door, handshaking, greeting, saying hello, just that smile first thing in the morning. And, your high fives now might have to be an elbow bump, not a fist bump, with COVID. But again, like, what does that look like? If you're with your kids online, like what's your doorway greeting to your kids online, and having it be intentional? Because sometimes we get, and I'll speak for myself, you get so caught up just in the, what do I have to do? What are my learning outcomes for the day? I've only got an hour. But being intentional, and if you have to, like, actually scheduling that time that you are creating those moments to build those relationships. I know you're probably familiar with Flipgrid, but that's probably one of my very favorite tools to use, because it is that video discussion platform. And especially in the beginning of the school year or the beginning of a semester, that's a great way to have kids introduce themselves, not only because you get to start to associate names with the faces, but it gives you a chance to hear them pronounce their name correctly. And that's so important that we're saying their names correctly. And some of them are easier to pronounce than others. And so it gives us almost a, like a landing page to go back and review, if you will, so that we are greeting them by name and with that smile. So again, you do this naturally anyways in person, but just being conscientious of that with your virtual kids as well. Icebreakers are super helpful both with adults and with kids. These are just those moments to, help build that community and get to know one another. And again, in that resource I shared, we have a lot of links to some examples for you guys. Bringing in humor where you can, and play. And so, like they say, that an hour of play, you can get to know somebody better than in a whole year of conversation. And so bringing in fun where you can, and there's so many different examples and ideas out there. Jamboard is a great resource to build in some of those collaborative icebreaker moments. Some other ideas. Again,
I'll jump in just for a second there, Judy. If you go back a slide, just, the one thing about icebreakers, though, is to have a purpose. And you see the things there, the bullet points: social, technical, or cognitive. Sometimes you want them just to social and interact early on. Technical, maybe you're trying to introduce how to use a new tool like Jamboard so they become comfortable with it. So, have a purpose there. It could be fun, it could be whatever, but you're saying, I'm also trying to teach you how to use Jamboard correctly. And then cognitive, maybe you're actually working in some of the content that you're teaching as well. So have a purpose with the icebreaker, knowing that early on social might be the way to go, but then as the other, as the year progresses, try and influence with those other types of icebreakers.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, and just mixing it up a little bit too. It keeps people on their toes. So one of a couple other ideas, the one on the left is a virtual locker room. Again, there's a template in the resources, but when you're just beginning to know your kids, just again, trying to connect that real world to the virtual world and giving that template to them ahead of time, and prompting them to find perhaps 10 things they want to tell about themselves and put in their locker. So just a different way to maybe have the kids introduce themselves. Flipgrid, again, has so many different resources in there. One of their newer features is that you can pixelate your image. So, you could gamify it a little bit and have kids introduce themselves with the pixelated, and they have to guess who they are. So just different ways, again. And like Jason said, with a purpose, but especially in the very beginning when you're just trying to get to know one another and build those connections. Another example, this was actually created by a high school teacher. This one is actually built sort of over the course of a week, where it prompts kids to include different elements about themselves, and it's structured in more of a station way. So again, a lot of different examples, but building those in, and some can take just a few seconds, and some can take the course of a week if you want to make them that long. You've probably seen little check-ins like this just to get a pulse of where kids or adults might be feeling at the moment. So just for the sake of right now, go ahead and just put in the chat how you're feeling at the moment. I can't see the chat right now, but I think for me right now, I'm feeling a little bit like number 2, like slow the fire hose down right now. So again, another way to check in. But to take that to the next level with some of your kids, consider having them make their own check-ins. And so this is a way where you can weave in some technical skills, but also get to know them a little bit and give you, the teacher, some memes that are connected to your students. And so there's some links at the bottom there with some templates, but have them create something that resonates with them. And it can be like, I created one with running shoes because I love to run. So I just found 9 different pairs of running shoes. And, you know, so if it was my day to share my meme, you know, I could put that out there to, you know, how are my classmates feeling today? But then it tells a little bit about myself as well. So just an activity that you might use to engage your kids. And so having them create their own, and if they don't want to do something that resonates with them personally, it could just be something of interest to them, something that they enjoy, books that they like, or a different connector. So that can be
one other thing on that is, you know, if you can tie this to maybe even some data collection. So if you have a standard one, you're not having kids make your own, and let's say one is like the not feeling good one, or, you know, whatever, it's a sad face or whatever, you can track that if you collect it. You know, you can have them put it in the chat, but you could also have them do it on a Google form and just reuse that over and over. And if you see that Johnny keeps putting ones, well, maybe it's a time to bring the counselors in or reach out to Johnny and say, hey, what's going on? Because that's, again, building that connection, that communication with a purpose. On top of having fun and being, you know, having some levity, there is some serious aspects that you can imply there.
right. And those are just a couple different examples, but I know some of you, Alex, I'm not sure if you're what high school you're at, but I know that Stevenson has Nearpod, Franklin has Pear Deck. Those are also some tools that you could use to build in some check-ins and collect some of that data. And as Jason said, you can make them formal or informal. Google Forms is another great tool that you can use to build in some of those check-ins to see where they're at and to get information about your students. Just so, again, all those opportunities where you can check in on their well-being, but also help guide the direction that you might take your class for the day as well. I know some of you are doing this already, but hosting some office hours in the spring. I know a lot of people were doing this in some cases just to give kids a space to connect and to chat. So again, this is really a personal preference for you and how your schedule works out. For some folks, they'd like to just have a standard date and time that I'm available if you want to come talk. Other times those office hours might be very purpose driven. And so for this hour, if you have a question about, you know, it could be that. But just again, creating some opportunities for kids to engage in conversation and to connect. And sometimes, as I'm sure you guys know, you've got those kids though who aren't going to be proactive and reach out to you. So it's reaching out to them and connecting. And the thing that sometimes I myself am guilty of is we're so caught up in all of this, you know, Zoom and Google Meet and email and all these high level pieces of technology to connect with kids that sometimes just remembering like the good old fashioned telephone is a great way to reach out and connect to kids and to establish a way to check in with them as well. And nobody knows your students better than yourselves, but just as many different ways as you can to provide opportunities for kids to check in with you, check in with each other. You know, and what that looks like, again, is going to vary depending on what your schedule is. But there's different apps out there as well that you could schedule sometimes. And we have some links for those in the resource. I'm not going to share this video at the moment, but it's in the link. So some of you might recognize Sarah Ahern there. So she used to be at Cooper. She's now teaching first grade in Ann Arbor. But as we said before, anytime that you can put your voice and your face in front of the kids, whether it be a video, a cartoon character like a Bitmoji, just audio, is really helpful. And that might look like a video. And I included this one here because this one was Sarah's first video when she was doing summer school this summer. And again, it's for first graders, but what I love about it is that it's not perfect. And I think that's really important because I think sometimes many of us as teachers are perfectionists and feel like we have to go through 15 different iterations, and it does not. I mean, it's real, it's authentic. So whenever possible, if you're not in person with them, putting that little video message in there. If you're, and it can even be, you know, if you're doing a Google form and you're putting out a survey or a quiz rather, and you're putting in the correct responses or incorrect responses, you could even put a video in that feedback response, you know, like, you know, whether they got it correct or not. As far as audio feedback goes, there are different extensions like Mote or Talk and Comment. So if you are even leaving comments within Google Classroom or within a Google Doc or in any other way where you're maybe just typing in the feedback, consider using audio feedback as opposed to the written feedback as well, because research has shown that kids are more likely to respond to your feedback if they hear your voice than if they just see the written text. And so any opportunity you have to do that is really helpful for your kids, because they love you and they want to see you and they want to hear you. This is just fun. If you're not familiar with Miss Parks, she's amazing. She's got all kinds of different tutorials out there, but just getting creative with your Bitmojis. And so using some tools like remove the background or unscreen, you can very easily put a GIF of yourself in yours too. And so again, fun little ways to make those connections, and doesn't take a whole lot of time. Newsletters, tried and true. This just comes down to the communication, and what that newsletter looks like could be a lot of different ways, but communication is key. I always have erred on the side of I would rather give too much information than not enough. And then engaging your kids in conversations. And again, if you're in person with your kids, it's, well, pre-COVID, flexible seating and rearranging the classrooms and the small groups. And now you're having to even really think differently. And what does that look like? Because we still have to be 6 feet apart. If you're in the virtual world, what does that look like? How can we engage in those conversations? And so I'll lean in again to Flipgrid, which is a great tool for some of those video discussions, which now also allows you to do some text conversations. We've done, the waterfall chats. You can have your traditional just written threaded discussions. Google Classroom doesn't have like a traditional discussion board per se, but by asking that question, we can simulate, a threaded discussion the best that we can. Again, and using the comments features in some of the Google apps, you can get creative in what that conversation looks like. And I am going to, so we've talked a little bit about this. And then I know that this was a big thing back in the spring when everybody was trying to keep everybody's spirits up, but I kept it in here because, again, any opportunity you can to, I say, weave in some fun and some humor, but it's also a way you can get to know your kids too. And that might be the fun thing that gets them to want to turn on their camera for the day or show up for class that day. And then lastly, before we shift into another activity, is just anytime that you can weave in moments of gratitude and appreciation. We know the power of thank you. And I would say the same to you guys as teachers, right? You guys are doing like amazing things. And I think teachers are the most humble people on the planet Earth. And not that you do it for the thank you letter, but just the power of that acknowledgement that things are, that you're appreciated. And the same is true for your students as well too. So there's some links in the resources on some different suggestions ranging from gratitude journals and notes of gratitude that you can do. So what we would like to do is just to shift here, because our goal is to each session put you guys into breakout rooms, not just for the sake of putting you into a breakout room, but to have a purpose, but to model different structures that might be helpful for you when you're putting your kids into breakout rooms. And I know that you have the enterprise of Google Meet now, so you guys do have breakout rooms. We're using, of course, Zoom, but one of the key pieces when you throw kids into, or adults into a breakout room, is having some type of a structure. And so what we're going to ask you to do is spend a few minutes taking either some of the ideas that we've shared today, some of the things that maybe you're doing and maybe you're going to tweak a little bit this semester, but just to think about how are you fostering those relationships with your kids, building community and communicating to engage your students. And we still have online there, but you should probably take that off and to just leave it at to engage your students. And then Jason's going to put you, I know we have a small group, but we're going to go into small little breakout rooms. And then if Jason hasn't already done so, is going to put a link to this slide deck in there. So if you're in breakout group 1, go ahead and you will be on slide deck 1, where we ask that you put your group members' names there. That builds in some accountability. And then really it's just a brainstorming session for yourself on this collaborative slide deck. So with that, Jason, are you all
Yep.
set?
Just make sure you click on that link in the chat, the bit.ly LPS break 1, and do it right now. And then I'm going to open up the chat, the rooms, and we'll have 4 minutes.
Okay, I don't see.
There they are. Wow. Okay. So that was odd. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. There could be a whole host of reasons, or just 3 o'clock Zoom and is, everywhere else is online across the country using Zoom. So, so we're kind of wrapping up here. So we'll just kind of quickly go through a couple of the things you wrote down. Jen and Christine, you wrote down email, change the tone. How can I help? Just to, kind of expand on that one for a second.
Well, I was saying to Christine that, like, in the past, my emails would have been like, hey, Jody, I noticed you're missing 17 assignments. They're on Classroom Connect. And this is like, hey, I'm noticing you're missing, are having some trouble getting your assignments in. Is something going on? Like, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. Like, as simple as that was, it was kind of a game changer. The responses I got are usually, thank you so much for checking on me, is usually the first thing. And I don't think that any other year that lots of times it's never been that, like, I don't know, warm.
Yeah.
Like, they were grateful, but it was different.
Right. And so on the other one, I see you put, Alex, you put your Bitmoji classroom there. You want to talk about that one a second?
I think I did pretty well with my Google Classroom in general, and I do a lot of formative assessment, like how do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10, and that works well with my advanced kids. But I'm really grateful for some of the advice I got today on how to be better with my regular chemistry kids and do more of the more check-ins, more creative check-ins. I know my Bitmoji, you have to update my hair a lot. That just doesn't ever stay the same. But I just wanted to say real quick, I'm really grateful for all the things I've learned today, because I love that meme scale with the running shoes, or just a scale in general. So I'm rambling, I'm sorry.
No, that's great. That's great.
Did you see Bill Nye on my slide?
Yes. Yes.
A must, yeah.
It's awesome.
So as we kind of wrap up here, we want to, be cognizant of time. So what we're doing, and we did this in the fall as well, is we're, as we both put the links in at the same time, we're trying to create a website repository for all this. So what we'll do is we'll put all the recordings in there, and we'll put additional resources that maybe, links to tools and things like that. So these are the things that we'll have there. And this is something you can revisit at times. And so that's the link to the Google site for that. We do have a feedback survey. Again, make sure for future sessions, what we hear what you're asking for, and give us any feedback that you see fit. There's the link to the survey as well, and there's a little QR code for you. So our contact information is there. You can reach out to us at any time, just if you got a quick question about anything. And thanks for coming today.
I just want to add that I did attend this course in the fall, and I've continued to go back to that site. So a very, very valuable resource. And how can we access it? Is it in the chat?
We put it in the chat.
Okay.
And we'll add, so these 3 aren't active right now. So as we move through this series, we'll kind of open up each one and add to it, and we'll post the recordings there as well. So it will grow over time.
Any other questions that anybody has?
Thanks for taking the time out of your day. I know that you guys are so busy and swamped. So thank you.
And again, congratulations, you made it through a semester. Woo-hoo.